Hi friends, and welcome to JavaScript Best Practices. This short collection of tips and tricks, do's and don'ts is intended to accomplish two things for you, the JavaScript developer. First is to help you become fluent in and cognizant of the available constructs within the JavaScript language and to help you use good judgment when you engage with those tools. The second thing is to, of course, help you build the safety, the performance, and the quality of your applications in large and small ways, not just for your users, but also for you as the developer. Now, this course requires a very firm foundation in the basics of the JavaScript language. And if you lack that, make sure you head over to the JavaScript Road Trip course, which will help give you a firm foundation in those basics for use with the concepts of this course. And with that, it's time to move forward with your journey. Welcome to the land of best practices.
Find the sort of syntax first for the useful tools that you may need. Wear the pendant of performance for efficiency and speed. Cautions crystal clears the sky with triple equals and try catch, avoiding stuff that sucks and parsing better numbers out of stretch. At last the golden shining mail of modularity. When namespace closure imports long defend integrity. For polished skills in JavaScript, the treasure trove this is. Now raise your sword and strike your shield with these best practices.
Hello travelers, and welcome to the first portion of your journey through the land of JavaScript best practices. In this first level, we'll be examining alternate methods of syntax that will help you organize lengthier bits of conditional code into more concise, informative, and legible blocks of functionality. At Code School, we know that staying fluent and aware of what's even possible within a language is a best practice itself. Cultivating a thorough knowledge of what's even available to you within the JavaScript language helps you become a more versatile, a well-rounded developer, especially when you might see these constructs out there in the wilds, or even just in code that you were hired to maintain, but that you didn't build yourself. Now, as with any tool, there are good uses and not so good uses, and we'll do our best to provide you with your best bets while we bring you up to speed. And with that, it is time to tackle the ternary conditional, logical assignment, and the switch block. Good luck finding the sword of syntax. Hey everybody, welcome to JavaScript Best Practices. This is the first level, the sword of syntax. I'm Jason Milhouse, and in this first section, we'll be examining the ternary conditional. In order to do that, we're going to take first a look at the standard conditional block. The first thing we'll do here to set up our conditional block is to declare a variable called isArthur, and we're going to set that equal to false. Next, we'll declare a weapon variable. Then in our conditional block, we'll say if isArthur, we're going to assign that weapon variable to be Excalibur. Otherwise, if it's not Arthur, then we're going to assign longsword to that weapon variable. Now what you should notice here is that this sort of takes two blocks of code just to get one assignment finished. That's sort of a little long in terms of code length. So let's see what we can do about using a syntax trick that will make this significantly more concise. To build a ternary conditional, the first thing you'll do is place a condition down at the front of your ternary conditional build. Following that condition is going to be a question mark operator. That's going to divide the ternary conditional into the condition and the actions to take. Next up, you're going to have a pair of expressions that follow that question mark. These are going to be separated by a colon. One of these will be picked as the conditional's result. As you can see, if the condition is true, then we will get this left side of the colon as a result. And if the condition's false, we're going to go ahead and get the right side. So let's see how our current conditional block can translate into the ternary conditional format. You can see here we're going to stick our condition, which is isArthur, a single variable with a Boolean value. And then on the left-hand side of the colon, we're going to put Excalibur because that is what we want to be the weapon if isArthur is true. On the right-hand side, we're going to put longsword. That's what should happen if isArthur is false. Now if we were to enter this on the console, since isArthur is currently false, we're going to go ahead and get the right side returned from this ternary conditional, the longsword. Now by itself, this ternary conditional expression will return the right answer, but what happened to storing it in weapon, which is what happens in our original conditional block? Well, we can do that too. Let's check it out. So what we've got now is we've got that var weapon declared, and we're going to go ahead and assign it immediately upon declaration to the result of the ternary conditional. So after choosing the appropriate sword here, the compiler is going to go ahead and assign that choice immediately to weapon. And if we were to console log out what the current weapon is, we could see that the current weapon is the longsword. Cool thing about ternary conditionals is that we can also use them together in concatenation. Let's check it out. If we kind of scoot our stuff over here, get rid of that weapon variable, and just place the ternary conditional down in the place of that weapon variable, we can see that, uh-oh, what the heck, man? We got Excalibur out of this. What happened? Let's see. Problem here is that that cool question mark operator has a lower precedence than the plus concatenation operator. That's interesting. What does that mean? Well, what happens here is the plus sort of only knows how to evaluate a variable and add it to a string. And that's all going to happen before the question mark actually gets to check any condition at all. So what we got here is current weapon as a string being concatenated with is Arthur the Boolean before any kind of check happens. And that current weapon false is just a string. So now that question mark is looking for a Boolean, but it finds a string. So what does it do? Well, it turns out that in JavaScript, any value will evaluate to truthiness if it is not the falsy values. The falsy values are false, 0, undefined, not a number, the empty string, or null. So in this case, the question mark looks at that string and says, truthy value, so I'm going to take the left-hand side of our ternary conditional. Well, how the heck can we fix that? Well, since the ternary conditional can be evaluated as an expression, we can also group it as an expression. So let's throw some parentheses around this guy. And you can see now that when we log it out, we get exactly what we wanted, which is an evaluation of the variable only for the ternary conditional check, and we get current weapon is the longsword. So what happens if the king shows up? Well, let's change is Arthur to true, which means we got King Arthur on hand. And when we evaluate it, you can see we get the current weapon is now Excalibur, just as we wanted. Turns out that we can make compound ternary conditions as well. We can use any compound Boolean expression as the condition to check for our ternary conditional. So let's do that. What we've got here is a variable called isKing, and we've set that equal to false. So what that means is we've got some dude named Arthur, but doesn't happen to be the king. Maybe he was named after the king, but he's not the king, so he shouldn't get Excalibur, right? So let's see what we can do with that. You can see we've put a double ampersand, the double and, right down there next to is Arthur, and we've put is king next to it to make sure that both of those things are true before we select a condition. Once we've done that, the question mark takes a look at is Arthur, finds true, takes a look at is king, finds false though, and so that whole compound conditional evaluates to false, and we'll choose the right-hand side of the colon or the longsword. Now, if we set isKing to true, just to kind of show the other possible result here, we'll get the compound logic evaluating to true on the left-hand side of the question mark, which means that the ternary conditional will return just what we expect for the king, which is the sword Excalibur. Something you might see very often out there in the JavaScript wilds is that ternaries can also take action in their results. That means that any executable statement can fall in the left-hand side or the right-hand side. Meaning when we check the condition, we can actually take action, not just return some value. So let's take a look. So we're going to scoot our stuff over here. We got is Arthur and is king moving to the left as our compound conditional check. And now on the right-hand side of our question mark, we're going to alert, Hail Arthur, King of the Britons, if both of those things on the left-hand side of the question mark are true. And if not, then we'll say, charge on, ye knight, for the glory of the king. And you can see that since both of our variables are now true, apparently we've got the king in the house, we get an alert that comes out and says, Hail Arthur, King of the Britons. If we change is king to false, we've got that dude Arthur again, not the king, just some random. And we execute the ternary conditional, you can see that we get the correct alert for that situation. Ternaries can offer a concise way of deciding which function to choose on the fly. They provide a slightly different format for picking immediately invoked functions based on some conditions. Let's check that out. So we'll scoot our stuff up here, and you can see now on the right-hand side of our question mark, we're going to put an immediately invoked function. What's it going to do? It's going to alert hail to the king, and it's also going to log out the king's weapon. Following the colon, now we're going to put another immediately invoked function that's going to alert for the regular knight, as well as log out that their weapon is the longsword. Remember that if you want to get an immediately invoked function expression, you will need to add the parentheses behind the expression to call that expression. If we were to evaluate this situation, you can see that we would get "Charge on ye knight for the glory of the king," since "is king" is false. We'll also get a console log out that says the current weapon is longsword. Now, ternaries can also take multiple actions. We want to show you that, but we also want to caution you that that can get very dense. So sometimes a conditional block is better for this particular situation, but you should know, to be very fluent, that multiple actions can be taken inside of each result in a ternary conditional. So here you can see after the question mark, we've got a parenthetical expression that has two executable statements in it separated by a comma. So if it's Arthur and it's the king, we want to assign Excalibur as that individual's weapon and Goosewhite as that individual's helmet. On the other side of the colon, we've got the same format, and we're going to give the regular knight a weapon of the longsword as well as an iron helm for his helmet. So if we were to check out "is Arthur" and "is king," you can see one is true, one is false. So if we were to log out the weapon and the helmet situation, we would see that we would get the current weapon is a longsword and the current helmet is the iron helm. That's because both of our executable statements in the false part of our conditional executed. One more thing you might see associated with ternary conditionals, especially under the hood of some JavaScript frameworks, is the nested ternary conditional. A ternary can actually hold other ternaries within each one of the possible responses. You don't want to do this too much because it can get very dense and slightly challenging to read, and we always want to be worried about legibility, right? But we want to make sure, again, that you're fluent with this type of code. So we're going to scoot our stuff down, and you can see that we have added a variable "isArcher," and we're going to set that equal to true. Now, in the false portion of our outermost ternary conditional, we're going to slap down that "isArcher" variable as the condition for a new ternary conditional to check. That's right. We're trying to keep this organized, right? And you should too, so you want to use indentation as your friend for legibility. Following that "isArcher" variable, we're going to place another question mark. That means that question mark is looking only at "isArcher" for a truth value. And then we'll build a second nested ternary conditional after that question mark. You can see that if we have an archer, we want to instead assign the weapon to be the longbow and its helmet to be a mail helm. And if it's false, that means we don't have the king, and we also don't have an archer, which means that we have just a regular knight, and they should get the longsword and the iron helm. Taking a look at our existing Boolean variables, we've got "isArthur" is true, so apparently it's a guy named Arthur, but he's not the king, because that's false. He is, however, an archer, so he is Arthur the Archer. Yeah, cool. Anyway, since we've got Arthur the Archer, we're going to go ahead and log out what his weapon and his helmet is, and you can see that what happens is, since "is king" is false, we're going to go ahead and check the second nested ternary conditional. We find that the "isArcher" variable is actually true, and so we assign longbow as the weapon, mail helm as the helmet. And if we were to log out his current weapon and his current helmet, we get longbow and mail helm for Arthur the Archer. Yeah, so welcome to the end of ternary conditionals. Have some fun with these challenges, and we'll see you back in the next section.